Hey there, if you've got political science exams on your mind, you are in the right place. We're about to break down a concept that is absolutely central to international relations, the state. Let's get you set to crush that exam question. So think about it for a second. Pick any major global headline, a war, a big trade agreement, a climate conference. Who are we always talking about? We're talking about countries. We're talking about states. Why? Why does the state always seem to be the main character in every single one of these stories? That's the big question we're going to unpack. And here's our game plan. First, we'll look at why the state gets the starring role. Then, we'll dive into the core reasons why theories focus on it. After that comes the really important part for getting top marks, the critiques, the cracks in the theory. Then we'll check out some new research, and finally, we'll land on a solid conclusion. Seriously, this is the perfect structure for an essay. Okay, section 1. First things first. Before we can start poking holes in the idea, we've got to understand exactly why the state is seen as the absolute main event in the drama of world politics. You know, pretty much all the major theories you study, we're talking realism, liberalism, even constructivism, they all start from the same place. They all treat the state as the #1 actor. It's the one that declares war, the one that signs the treaties, it's the one making the big moves. Now, here's a really cool way to think about it, from the political scientist David Lake. He calls it a methodological bet. Look, theorists know the world is incredibly messy, right? You've got NGOs, huge corporations, activist groups, but they are making a bet. They're betting that if you want the simplest, most powerful way to explain what's happening in the world, your best bet is to focus on the state. It's a way to cut through all the noise. Okay, let's keep building this argument. If focusing on the state is a bet, what makes it a good bet? This next part is all about the 3 core justifications. You're definitely going to want to know these. Think of it like a 3-legged stool that holds the whole theory up. We've got the idea of a national interest, the state as a unique authoritative actor, and the impact of systemic processes. Let's tackle them one by one. So first up, the national interest. This is a massive, and I mean massive, analytical shortcut. Instead of getting totally bogged down in the messy, complicated world of domestic politics, this idea lets us treat the state as if it's one single person, a unitary actor. We just assume that it's acting with a single purpose, whether that's to survive, to gain power, or something else entirely. Second, and this is a really crucial point, the state is the only authoritative actor. When a state makes a decision, like to go to war or sign a treaty, that decision is legally binding on every single person inside its borders. It doesn't matter if you agree with it or not. Compare that to an NGO, say Doctors Without Borders. They can only speak for their members. They can't force an entire country to do anything. That legal authority, that sovereignty, is what makes the state a whole different beast. And the third pillar is the international system itself. Now, a key thinker here is Kenneth Waltz, and his big idea is that the world is anarchic. And that doesn't mean it's chaos with people running around in the streets. It just means there's no world government. There's no global 911 you can call for help. This reality puts a top-down pressure on every single state, forcing them to, say, prioritize their own security. It's a force you would completely miss if you only looked at what's going on inside a country. Okay, so we built the case for the state-centric view. Now, here's where we get to the stuff that shows you can think critically, the stuff that gets you the highest marks. Let's start picking it apart and look at the cracks in the theory. The first big challenge hits that first pillar we talked about. Is there really such a thing as a single national interest? I mean, think about any major policy, like a big trade deal. That deal is going to create winners and losers inside the country. Some industries will boom, others will bust, different groups will fight like crazy for their own interests. Suddenly that neat idea of a single, unified national goal starts to look, well, pretty darn shaky. But, and this is super important for your exam essay, the critique isn't a silver bullet. First, even if half the country hates that new trade deal, the state's decision is still legally binding on everyone. The authority still holds. Second, domestic politics might explain what a country wants going into a negotiation, but it doesn't explain the final outcome, what actually happens when it has to bargain and clash with other states. And third, those big systemic pressures, like anarchy, are still pushing on the state from the outside, no matter how messy its internal politics are. All right, the second major challenge is all about control. The traditional theory assumes the state is the one pulling the strings. But what about today's world? We've got giant multinational corporations, global activist networks, and information flying across the planet on the internet. Money, people, ideas, they all flow across borders, and it often feels like they're completely bypassing the state. So the question is, has the state lost its grip?
And again, the answer is, it's complicated. For one thing, some states, especially liberal democracies, are actually designed to have less control over their societies. That's kind of the point. Also, states often allow these transnational actors to operate because it benefits them, think trade or influence. And then there's technology. Sure, the internet helps activists organize, but it also gives states unbelievable new tools for surveillance and control. So the state's power hasn't just disappeared, it's evolved, it's changed.
So the theory has some problems, for sure, but it's not dead in the water. That brings us to our next section. Where is the research headed now to try and fix these weaknesses? This is the cutting-edge stuff that's happening right now.
Right. So if we all agree that the simple, old-school model isn't the full picture, we have to ask, what's next? Where do we go from here? Well, researchers are pushing things forward in 3 really interesting new directions.
The first new frontier is getting a lot smarter about state structure. Researchers are moving past simple labels like weak or strong states. They're looking at the whole spectrum, from so-called failed states to highly controlling totalitarian states, and they're asking, how does something like globalization affect each of these types differently? It turns out the internal wiring of the state really matters. The second frontier is what's called unit heterogeneity. It sounds complicated, but the idea is simple. It's about challenging the old myth that all states are basically the same. I mean, think about it. Does a modern nation-state like France behave in the same way as the old Ottoman Empire did? Of course not. History is full of all sorts of different political units, and scholars are finally realizing our theories need to account for those differences. And the third frontier is international hierarchy. This is a big one. The key insight is that while the whole international system might be anarchic with no world government, the actual relationships between states are often anything but. We see obvious spheres of influence, protectorates, informal empires, clear power dynamics. Hierarchy is everywhere, and it has huge consequences for everything from war and peace to everyday policy.
So, that brings us all the way to our conclusion. After walking through the core theory, the big critiques, and the future of the research, what's the final verdict? What's the bottom line you should walk away with?
Here it is. This is probably the most important thing to remember. Focusing on the state isn't a moral judgment. It's not about being pro-state or saying states are good. It's a pragmatic, analytical choice. It's a simple recognition that for all their flaws and all the challenges, states are still, by far, the most powerful actors shaping the world we live in.
And I really can't say it any better than David Lake himself, so I'm going to leave you with this killer quote from him. Scholars who ignore the state do so at their peril, since no analysis of international relations can do without it. That pretty much says it all, doesn't it?
So, as you head into your exam, here's a final thought to chew on. As we face these massive global challenges, climate change, pandemics, you name it, is the answer stronger, more capable states? Or has the state model itself reached its limits? Do we maybe need to invent something totally new to manage our world? A lot to think about. Good luck with your studies.